She has a private investigation company. It's part of what you do, isn't it?
I run it.
Yeah. Wow, extraordinary.
So people, because I've got a profile, people think it's me actually sitting in cars, taking pictures, doing that kind of thing. So when they see me, they take off.
Do you do the old, like the 70s spy movies? Do you still have photographs? Do you still photograph people from parked cars?
Totally.
Wow.
Cool. Look, do you know, technology might have changed, right? But human nature hasn't.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how advanced we get. Humans still do the same old thing that they were doing, neons ago.
And then you present to your client pictures taken from a parked car of someone with a lover.
Well, the silliest thing people do, especially at Christmas time and especially at Christmas, functions, they're going back out to the car park or on the side of the cars parked on the road, and they'll hop into the car, and then somebody will just open the car door and give them a kiss. And, of course, the light's on, isn't it? So there you go.
Tricks of the trade.
And, and then zap, you're done.
Zap. How about that, Mark?
So there's the old camera, and you've got the old detective's eyes. There's nothing better.
Nothing better.
No.
It works into the theme, doesn't it? Nothing better than old school.
Totally.
You can't beat it.
It still works.
You know? Forget that. That's a different type of connectivity.
We use all the technology, but
actually, that must have made life easier though in some ways. All the internet must have made finding stuff so much easier. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
No Encyclopedia Britannica required.
No, not anymore.
On a final night before we end the show, do we need to stop this national obsession with pies? An opinion piece and stuff argues. Like most of the food that we love as part of Kiwi culture, fish and chips, tomato sauce, the pie is a nutritionist's nightmare. Fat, meat, pastry, it's got all the good stuff, but no doubt part of our obesity problem. And yet, what do? We celebrate the beauty of the pie. Probably one of our most media-covered awards in the country. The Pie Awards has made a superstar of its 7-time winner, Patrick Lamb. And as it should, he clearly knows his way around the pie. But around the panel, do we give the pie too much attention, Mark?
Yeah, I was surprised to see he actually makes 125 or sells 125 pies per hour.
What?
Yeah, and the article said too, which I'd take exception to, pies are New Zealand's dominant lunch morsel. I don't think that's the case anymore. Maybe 15 years ago, but not 2019.
That's what I was thinking.
We're all into quinoa salads now with tofu on the side. That's what we're all about.
Do you reckon? What about you? I mean,
not quite, but yeah. But
my producer wisely says outside of Auckland. You're speaking
and lamb chops.
very new. You're speaking very new market. Speak there, aren't you, Julia?
No, look, I think I haven't had a pie since I was a kid, but I'll occasionally make a pie.
Homemade
but it's a different pie. It's a homemade pie. But you know what? It's like everything now. It's moderation. The reason we've got issues is because it's the fast food. It's the pies, just chugging them down. And how many an hour?
125 an hour. That's a lot of pies.
That's a heck of a lot of pies. Come on.
Should we less honour the pie? And where's the quinoa awards, for God's sake?
Totally.
Pumpkin and walnut quinoa with a nice vinaigrette.
2 streets in Greyland might be up for the award, but that's about it. But I think the pie thing, I think it's overdone.
Oh, it's
really
totally overdone. And look at what it does to you. You've got to get rid of the pie, not completely, but just moderation.
Well, I was going to agree with you, but then I had a tweet here: chicken and leek pie is delicious, and I couldn't agree more.
Actually, that sounds good.
Yeah,
exactly.
But that sounds nicer than your normal pie.
Cheese.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right, Julia Hartley-Moore and Mark Thomas, you've been great. Thank you very much for being with us. See you tomorrow.
Pleasure.
Koutou, e te tomo o te reo Māori kuki airani. It's Cook Islands Language Week, and this is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Good evening, I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, tensions boil over at Ihumātao as police numbers swell amid altercations at the cordon will put accusations of rough handling to the superintendent in charge. Winston Peters surprises abortion advocates with talk of a referendum, and we're not the only jurisdiction debating the issue. Tempers flare outside the New South Wales Parliament as MPs debate a similar bill. President Donald Trump has announced he'll visit the site of the mass shooting in El Paso, Texas, but will he be welcome? Hong Kong tensions hit home as New Zealanders say they've received death threats for speaking out, and the chair of the Royal Commission into Abuse in State Care is resigning. We'll ask Suranand Satyanand why he's stepping down so early.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ana, ko Susana Ihumātao at DNA. The Deputy Police Commissioner, Wally Haumaha, is about to be welcomed onto Ihumātao. Protesters have prepared speakers to greet Mr Haumaha at a pōwhiri. RNZ understands that at a closed meeting after the pōwhiri, protesters and Mr Haumaha will discuss how to resolve the land dispute. The superintendent in charge of the policing operation at Ihumātao says her officers have been spat at and taunted during the 2-week standoff. Dozens of police officers were at the disputed land in South Auckland overnight, blocking Ihumātao Quarry Road with crowds of protesters standing in front of them. The county's Manukau District Commander Superintendent Jill Rogers says a significant number of extra officers were deployed and calm was restored with the help of protest organisers. She says many staff have opinions about land rights.
It's not an easy environment that they're policing out there. They've been faced with taunts, being spat at, being pushed day after day, and the way they've conducted themselves is an absolute tribute to them.
Superintendent Jill Rogers. Hundreds gathered around New Zealand today as part of the Ihumātao National Day of Action. Māni Dunlop reports.
People placed koha and sakiti at the Wellington protest, where more than 300 people gathered in solidarity with Ihumātao. Te Pua Waiō was at the land last night as tensions grew between police and protesters and travelled down for the rally in Wellington. She is overwhelmed by the aroha shown and will take the kite back to the whenua tomorrow. Dan, who was at the Wellington protest, is making his way to Ihumātao this weekend. He says the whenua should be returned to mana whenua and supports those who he says are protecting the land. Other protests took place in Whanganui, Dunedin, Rotorua and Hamilton. Ko Māni Dunlop, TNA.
The head of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in Care is leaving because the job has become too big. Sir Anand Satyanand will step down as chair of the inquiry in November, when he will start a 4-year term as Chancellor of Waikato University. The former Governor-General made the decision to quit earlier this year after his 75th birthday. Sir Anand says he signed up to the job thinking it would be part-time.
I don't think there's been any week since the beginning of last year where I've had 3 days. It's usually been 4 and most often 5, and it has been a significant piece of effort.
Sir Anand Satyanand, the government now has until November to find a replacement. Some New Zealand protesters against Hong Kong's extradition bill say they've been receiving death threats after speaking out against the law. Hundreds of people turned out at an Auckland University quad for a rally about the controversial law today. A week ago, an altercation between pro-Beijing and pro-Hong Kong democracy supporters ended with one woman being pushed to the ground. One man at the rally, who has lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years, says he was shocked by the abuse he's received after speaking at the protests.
Instagram, I get messages of people telling me to go die, my family should go die, like we're dogs, we're not humans, and like pretty much abuse all over.
The man says he has had to close all his social media accounts and change his phone number. The New Zealand share market has closed sharply lower but trimmed its losses as it got caught up in the turmoil caused by the escalation in the US-China trade war. The benchmark top 50 index has fallen about 1.5%, its second worst session this year. At one stage it was down more than 2% as investors dumped risky stocks and sought safety on the sidelines. All but a handful of the top stocks fell, with the biggest drops for those doing business with China or which had risen strongly in the recent market rally. The New Zealand market was in record territory last week, and so far this year it has more than 20% in value. Markets around Asia have also been weaker, but have also bounced off their lows. A Dunedin surveyor is headed to Wales to take issue with the way the Welsh competitor for the world's steepest street was measured. Baldwin Street in Dunedin's north-east valley lost its claim as the steepest street after Guinness World Records determined the Port Venglich in the Welsh town of Harlech was steeper. But Toby Stoff has raised concerns with the way Port Venglich was measured at the inside verge of the curve rather than the common practice of using the centre line. He says this would have greatly exaggerated the Welsh contender defined as steepness. Mr Stoff says once both streets have been measured accurately from the centre line, he will put all the evidence before Guinness World Records and let it decide if Baldwin Street should have its record reinstated. It's 5:05. The Warriors forward Adam Blair says reports of a referee making a racial slur about a former leading player does not at all reflect the team's current relationship with NRL officials. New Zealand Rugby League legend Mark Graham has revealed he heard audio of a referee referring to a player in a racist way after a match when he was Warriors coach in 1999 and 2000. The comments were reportedly raised with the NRL at the time, but no action was taken. With several controversial decisions going against the Warriors in recent weeks, debate has been reignited about a bias against the club from officials. But Blair says he's never noticed anything like what Graham was suggesting.
Yeah, I don't think it happens these days. I haven't heard one, and I've played a fair few games and played a long time in the NRL, so maybe back when Mark Graham was playing, then they may have had something then, but for us it's been really, respectful.
Adam Blair. The Breakers will have a very cosmopolitan look to their lineup this season, with 3 more overseas-based players signing on with the Auckland club for the upcoming Australian National Basketball League season. American guard Sek Henry, Nigerian centre Chris Obekpa and Lebanese centre Atta Majok have all joined the club. Henry was named most valuable player in the Israeli league last year, with Obekpa playing in Lebanon and having a fleeting NBA experience with the Golden State Warriors in 2016. Lebanon international Atta Majok was drafted by the LA Lakers in 2011 and holds an Australian passport, meaning he won't take up an import spot with the side. That's the news.
A tense night at Ihumātao.
There was a standoff for about 5 hours, and all we were trying to do was have our prayer.
Boy racers regroup.
Try and bring everyone together so that we can sort of support each other, because there's quite a few people who are crapping themselves over hearing metal on metal sounds.
And a collapse in the cricket.
3 weeks ago we were all slightly sore heads and celebrating a World Cup win, and all of a sudden it turns to the ashes and it's all gone a little bit wrong for England.
All the ups, downs and overs. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Then on 9 to noon, what are the technical fixes to curb climate change? And do we need an environmental rule book before we resort to risky forms of geoengineering? And after 10, sports writer Alex McClintock on his foray into amateur boxing, which quickly became an obsession. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west, from Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel and Taumaranui. Occasional showers, some heavy, with possibly thundery weather about Taranaki and Waitomo later tomorrow. Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine spells and the odd shower spreading from the west. Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, partly cloudy with a few showers. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine apart from high cloud. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast through to Wellington, also Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, mostly fine, a few showers tomorrow. For the remainder of Marlborough, also Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine with high cloud at times and isolated showers about coastal Southland and Clutha. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, scattered showers, rain for Fiordland tomorrow. And Chatham Island, showers easing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08.
Thanks very much, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lots coming up this evening. Winston Peters weighs in on the abortion debate, referring to a referendum as a possibility. We'll also have more on the unemployment rate, which has dropped. But first, we're heading to Ihumātao, where protesters say they've lost trust in the police. This is after tensions boiled over last night when police blocked them from moving further down the Quarry Road. It's been 2 weeks since occupiers opposing a new Fletcher Building housing development at the South Auckland site were served with an eviction notice. Last night there was a big increase in the number of both police and protesters, with protest leader Pania Newton alleging that she was pushed over by an officer during the 5-hour standoff. Tianiwa Huri Hanganui is at Ihumātao and filed this report.
Protesters were getting ready for karakia last night when a sea of blue suddenly appeared from the west end of Ihumātao Quarry Road. Dozens of police formed a human wall to block people from moving further down, and tensions escalated as protesters went up to meet them. Protest leader Pania Newton says she was pushed over by an officer. The incident filmed on a phone. The atmosphere at Ihumātao today was a stark contrast to the heated 5-hour overnight standoff. Many of the hundreds of people who came to support protesters on the front line had gone home, and those who remained were singing and gathering for food in the wharekai. But the confrontation with police has left many anxious, including a member of Mana Whenua, Kiani Matata, who says it's now difficult to trust police.
It is hard given the circumstances of last night, but we do have to have faith that moving forward we can work together, so we're always open to having those discussions.
She says her whānau and police had been in constant communication throughout the day yesterday, and the sudden increase in police numbers came as a complete shock.
Yesterday we were in discussions with the police around what de-escalation would look like. The whole kōrero yesterday was how do we reduce police numbers, how do we reduce kaitiaki numbers, how do we consolidate the reclamation happening here, and working on solutions around that, given that we're having kōrero to progress this resolution. So having more than 100 police show up last night during karakia was a surprise.
Police deny an officer pushed Pania Newton over. They say more officers were deployed because protesters had moved past the cordon despite repeated warnings not to. But protesters have accused the police of being too aggressive.
They closed us in like pigs. All we were trying to do was get some blankets and kai to
take over there to them like we've been doing for the whole time.
Front line here at Fletcher's Gate, and they wouldn't allow anyone through.
And they're keeping a close eye on the cordon in case police make another unexpected arrival tonight.
It was a very, very loaded atmosphere. It felt very heavy. It felt that potentially we could be under attack at any moment, as in physically under attack, being pushed or whatever.
Today, after a hectic night,
yes.
How are you feeling about police now?
Police in general, they're people doing a job. However, the tactical manoeuvres that they're using, I'm on edge waiting. I know that I'm ready to get back there at any moment. We're all ready.
About 30 police officers were stationed at Ihumātao today, with about 200 protesters continuing to occupy the site. At Ihumātao for Checkpoint, I'm Tianiwa Hurihanganui.
Well, you heard the accusation there, tactical manoeuvres. This is as accusations fly about what happened there last night with accusations by Pania Newton that police pushed her over as she tried to access or go through a gate. Now, the police say there's misinformation circulating about last night's standoff, the reasons for the increase in officer numbers and whether the protesters were warned that reinforcements would be brought in. Superintendent Jill Rogers has been coordinating the police operation at Ihumātao. Now, I spoke to her at the county's Manukau police station and I started by asking her if it was a surprise move, as the protesters claim.
Yesterday we were forced to scramble a number of staff in response to information that we received directly from the protest group of their intention to walk down Ihumātao Quarry Road through the police cordon and retake the land at the Kaitiaki village. Hence we were required to scramble a large number of staff to prevent them from doing that.
And how many extra staff were there, extra police cars and resources? What were the numbers there?
There was a significant amount of extra resource that were required to come in. They were taken from across Tamaki Makaurau from their business as usual roles. So it was quite a substantial amount of staff that were required to help the staff that were already there to ensure that it was peaceful and that we were able to make sure that everyone was able to stay safe.
Okay, Pania Newton, who's organising the spokesperson for Seoul, is saying that she was pushed as she was going through a gate. There's an online video of that, although police have denied that it happened. There's a video and it shows a scuffle and it shows some angry reaction to it from some of the protesters. Are the police still denying that took place?
We absolutely refute that allegation. We're aware that there's a number and a quantity of information that's within the social media realm that is incorrect. I remain incredibly proud of the staff and for the way they've conducted themselves over the last 2 weeks. And sometimes what's been quite volatile, testing and trying circumstances, they have remained professional throughout. And we just encourage people that there is a place for protest activity, but it must remain peaceful.
So is Panya Newton lying when she says that she was pushed to the ground by a police person?
We refute the allegation and are aware of some of the misinformation that is circulating within social media.
But there were scuffles there at least. What are you admitting in terms of contact with protesters from police?
So there was a stage there where our lines were forced back. You will see that in the video that has emerged from last night, and we were required to retreat. So my role is to make sure that our staff are operationally safe, and that decision was made last night that we would retreat and allow that access that did occur. Fortunately, we were able to restore calm with the assistance of the protest organisers who were able to ensure that order was restored, and we were able to see that calm sort of returned.
Have police broken trust with the protesters over this in terms of just the numbers that were brought in? They are still saying that they didn't have notice of that. So clearly trust has broken down. How much can the police admit to that circumstance?
So our response yesterday was in direct response to the information that we'd received from the protest group that their intention was to return to the Kaitiaki village, which is part of the disputed land, therefore in breach of the court orders that exist. We can't allow people to undertake unlawful activity. Our role there is to ensure that peace is maintained, that the protest can be done lawfully and peacefully, and that's our role there.
Are some of your officers conflicted here? We've seen some beautiful images, one of a police officer playing guitar, singing Waiata with the protesters. Was this also a bit of a reset, a bit of a show of force from the police about how serious this situation is?
Our response last night was in direct response to the information that we received from protest organisers. Our staff do have opinions about this matter, and I remain incredibly proud of the way they've conducted themselves. They've remained incredibly professional. It's not an easy environment that they're policing out there. They've been faced with taunts, being spat at, being pushed day after day, and the way they've conducted themselves is an absolute tribute to them.
So at its height last night, what were the numbers of police on the site?
At the height last night, we did scramble a lot of resource from across Tamaki Makaurau. Actual numbers I'm not going into because that's an operational decision for us to maintain, but we did scramble people from a whole range of duties that weren't associated with the protest activity.
Superintendent Jill Rogers there from Counties Manukau. She's the district commander. She's been out there, she says, every day at Ihumātao. She absolutely refutes, that's what her words were, absolutely refutes those accusations put forward by Panya Newton and the protesters. Get in touch with us. 2101 is the text. You can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. Have you been out to Ihumātao? Were you there last night? Let us know what you saw and what you think is the situation. People have been getting in touch already, so we will see if we can get to some of that feedback a bit later on in the program. It's just gone 18 minutes past 5. New Zealand First has thrown a wrench in the works of the abortion debate, suggesting its MPs' support for reform may depend on a binding referendum. The Justice Minister Andrew Little unveiled legislation yesterday which would make it easier for women to get abortions, but the 11th hour revelation from New Zealand First has caught him off guard. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Labour and New Zealand First have been in negotiations about abortion for months, wrangling to get the proposed law change agreeable to both sides. And yesterday, with the bill's announcement, it appeared consensus had finally been reached. Today, Winston Peters put that in doubt.
This was not in our manifesto at the last election. It's not part of our coalition agreement in any way, shape or form.
And Mr Peters is now talking about possibly putting it to the public.
But referendums are what New Zealand First has stood for a long time when it comes to conscience issues. We don't have to raise it earlier. Everybody that's been dealing with us knows that.
Everybody except seemingly his senior MP Tracy Martin. Just last night she told RNZ the party had no plans to push for a referendum. Today, a different tune.
I've made the comments on the record around New Zealand First Caucus and I don't have any further to make right this minute.
The news certainly caught the Justice Minister Andrew Little off guard, who first heard talk of the new position from reporters while heading into Parliament.
Well, it's never been raised with me in the months of discussions that I've had, so if it's a last-minute attempt by them, but in the end, like every SOP, and I imagine there will be lots of them, they'll have to get the support of the House.
New Zealand First's votes could be critical to the bill's success, with many MPs keeping their cards close to their chest. For the most part, Labour MPs are on side.
Absolutely for it. It's about time it came out after Crime's Act.
For me, it's a woman's right to choose.
Yeah, voting for it.
Yeah, I'm a yes.
I don't think I've got any right to tell a woman what to do with her body, so yeah, I'll happily vote yes.
But a small number are less committal, with some promising to vote for the first reading, but not guaranteeing any further.
Life is precious in Māori culture and I need to talk to my people. I'll vote with my conscience.
It's a difficult one because it is a life and death issue.
The split within the National Party is even more prominent. The more liberal wing, think Chris Bishop and Paula Bennett, is full-throated in its support.
I'll support the bill.
Look, I fundamentally think that abortion is a matter for women.
I've always been pro-choice.
Ultimately, a woman does need to have control over her own body.
But those more conservative, think Maggie Barry and Simeon Brown, are either firmly opposed or still biding their time.
Look, I can't in good conscience support legislation which will essentially legalise late-term abortion, which, in my mind, is something which is very, very extreme.
In my clinical life, clearly I've worked with a lot of this and I'll be voting against.
Well, I haven't seen the bill, so it'd be a bit silly to leap to it, wouldn't I?
I haven't had a chance to look at the bill yet, but I will be doing that today and I'll let you know after that.
Some of those on the fence may get some cover from their leader. National's Simon Bridges, traditionally conservative on such matters, has signalled he'll back the bill at its first reading, though his long-term support will depend on some changes being made.
It seems to me there should be significantly stronger safeguards than that post 20 weeks and late term, and that to me is where the focus for me should be, but it'll be for Select Committee to go through that and I'll be watching that very closely.
All 8 Green MPs will support the bill, as will the ACT leader David Seymour and independent Jamie Lee Ross. But whether it gets over the line will depend on how National and Labour split. And yes, New Zealand first. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCullough Who.
Just coming up to 22 minutes past 5, the Prime Minister says the government remains fully committed to the Royal Commission into Abuse in State Care. This is despite the shock resignation of its chair. Siranand Satyanand has led the inquiry since its establishment 18 months ago. But he announced today he'll step down in November, saying the workload has increased markedly since the inquiry's scope was widened to include faith-based institutions. He'll take up a 4-year term as Chancellor of Te Whare Wānanga o Waikato University, replacing former Prime Minister Jim Bolger. Our reporter Katie Scotcher has the story.
Siranand Satyanand has been in the job for just 18 months, but he says now is the time to go.
I've taken the opportunity at the age of 75, knowing that the survivors are being cared for, knowing that I have good colleagues. This is a sensible opportunity for the chairship of the Royal Commission to change.
Siranand says he made the decision to leave after his 75th birthday earlier this year. He says he signed up to the job thinking it would be part-time, but when the inquiry's scope was widened to include faith-based institutions and the timeline of the Commission extended, his workload increased significantly.
I don't think there's been any week since the beginning of last year where I've had 3 days. It's usually been 4 and most often 5, and it has been a significant piece of effort.
Since it was established, the Royal Commission has been heavily criticised for employing a gang member into one of its top jobs and for the way it is operating. Siranand says the inquiry has learnt from those mistakes.
We have taken on board what has happened, have worked out why it has happened, and if there has been a mistake or something wrong occur, there have been steps put in place to fix that.
Mervyn Singham, the inquiry's executive director, says those challenges have nothing to do with Siranand's resignation.
We have faced a number of challenges, and what we've been doing is listening, learning, and incorporating what we've heard by way of feedback into the way we do things, and we will be doing that right until the end of the inquiry.
The minister responsible for the Royal Commission, Tracy Martin, says the resignation shouldn't come as a surprise.
This was going to always be one of the longest inquiries that New Zealand was going to see. So, we will see people who come on, do a really good job for us, but then for circumstances in their own lives need to move on to something else.
Ms Martin says she hopes Sir Anand's departure won't discourage survivors from contributing to the inquiry.
I'm confident that Sir Anand has led the process up to this point so that when the open public hearings begin, that we now have a Royal Commission that people can be confident in.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the resignation won't affect the government's commitment to the inquiry.
It's likely that the Royal Commission into abuse and state care will take some time, and that means we may see personnel changes from time to time. What's important is that we continue their work, and that's absolutely our commitment.
The government now has until November to find a new chair for the Royal Commission. Sir Anand will attend the inquiry's first public hearing in October, when expert witnesses will give evidence. He will be paid by the inquiry until his departure and will not receive a payout. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
And you can hear more from Sir Anand Satyanand after 6 o'clock tonight. It's just coming up to 26 minutes past 5. The unemployment rate has unexpectedly fallen below 4% for the first time in 11 years. The jobless rate had been expected to rise, and the government is hailing it as a tick of approval for its economic plan amid slowing global growth and weak business confidence. Our business reporter Madison Reedy has the latest.
They're touted as the statistics that can help sink governments. But the latest unemployment figures are bringing joy to the beehive. The number of people out of work has unexpectedly fallen to its lowest level in more than a decade. The unemployment rate fell to a seasonally adjusted 3.9% in the June quarter from 4.2% in the March quarter. The last time it was at this level was in June 2008. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, wasn't hiding his delight.
Yeah, I think they're excellent numbers. I mean, they show a strong economy that's pretty resilient in the face of obviously some declining global trends. Particularly pleased to not only see unemployment down, but employment rates up, and also to see wages rising as well. And I think that combination is what we're looking for in the economy.
But others are confused. All forecasters, including the Reserve Bank, were expecting a slight rise in unemployment to around 4.3 or 4.4%. ASB's chief economist Nick Tuffley is as surprised as the rest. But with low business confidence, he believes these positive numbers will sour soon.
We are seeing that businesses have been getting very cautious about their hiring intentions, and they are starting to report a lot more profitability pressure as well. So costs are rising, there's not much ability to pass them on, so margins are under pressure, and that does mean businesses are still fairly cautious.
But the latest figures show 20,000 jobs were created in the June quarter. There's also been a slight fall in the number looking for work, and more women in Māori are landing jobs. There's been growth in wages too. They're up by 2.2% in the past year, largely because of the rise in the minimum wage in April. The Council of Trade Unions President, Richard Wagstaff, says it's pleasing that the work being found is also better paid.
For too long now, people have been promoting the idea that increases in the minimum wage or wage increases will inhibit employment rates. But in fact, these facts put a lie to that. And we've always sustained the view that, you can increase wages, you can increase collective bargaining, and you can reduce unemployment if you manage things well.
However, many aren't convinced yet. Economists say they're not reading too much into these numbers because the labour market data typically lags by up to 6 months. Underlying wage inflation is weak and the economy is still slowing. And despite the strong numbers and the Finance Minister's delight about them, the Reserve Bank is still expected to cut interest rates again, probably as early as tomorrow. For Checkpoint, I'm Madison Reedy.
Just got a little bit of time before the headlines at past for a bit of feedback. It's been streaming through on Ihumātao. Obviously, there's a war of words about what went on last night, with the police saying that protesters pushed past the cordon. The protesters are saying that police were pushing them, and in particular, Pania Newton, who's leading the protest. Mary has got in touch and says, how can anything the police say be believed? Why are they there in the first place? Who's paying, Fletcher or me, the taxpayer? Don't they have crimes to investigate? And then Glenda says, well, a poor protester got pushed over. If we were this precious in 1981, nothing would have been achieved. If the protesters try to occupy land which has been deemed out of bounds to them, then the police will no doubt respond. Officers could clear the entire place in 30 minutes. That's from Glenda. And someone else who's perhaps got a similar point of view says, why is a domestic dispute between two factions of one iwi at Ihumātao being allowed to prevent Fletchers conducting business as normal? And why are politicians and police being used by said iwi to try and get their own way? Come on, police, act on the trespass notices and arrest them, so much needed houses can get built. Thank you for all your feedback, and do keep sending it in. We'll see if we can get to a bit more later in the program. It's right on 5:30 here at Checkpoint on RNZ National. Coming up later in the program, a former state ward asks why it's taken him more than a decade to access his personal files. Donald Trump plans to visit El Paso after the weekend's mass shooting at Walmart. And has Dunedin been ripped off? A surveyor who thinks his city's been robbed of the world's steepest street title heads to Wales in an attempt to claim it back. We love your feedback. 2101 is the text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Email us at checkpointr@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna Leatawa with the headlines.
Protesters at Ihumātao are preparing to welcome the Deputy Police Commissioner, Wally Homaha, at a pōwhiri on the land. RNZ understands that at a closed meeting after the pōwhiri, protesters will discuss with Mr Homaha how to resolve the land dispute. The superintendent in charge of the policing operation at Ihumātao says her officers have been insulted during the 2-week standoff. Dozens of police officers were at the disputed land in South Auckland overnight, blocking Ihumātao Quarry Road with crowds of protesters standing in front of them. Superintendent Jill Rogers says a significant number of extra officers were deployed and calm was restored with the help of protest organisers. The head of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in Care has decided to quit after his 75th birthday. Sir Anand Satyanand says he signed up to the job thinking it would be a part-time role, but he says he's been working almost full-time and putting in significant effort. Some New Zealand protesters against Hong Kong's extradition bill say they've received death threats after speaking out against the law. Hundreds of people turned out at the Auckland University Quad for a rally about the controversial law today. One man at the rally says he was shocked by the abuse he's received on social media after speaking at protests. The New Zealand share market has been hit by the turmoil caused by the escalation in the US-China trade war, closing sharply lower. The benchmark top 50 index has fallen about 1.5%, its second worst session this year. All but a handful of the top stocks fell, with the biggest falls for those doing business with China or which had risen strongly in the recent market rally. Mobile phone users are being warned about a rise in a popular phone scam. Spark has reported an increase in one-geary or one-ring phone scams today. The scam sees overseas scammers call a number, let it ring once, then hang up in the hope their call is returned so they can charge premium rates. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. You started with the doom and gloom there on business, so we're just going to continue it now with Nona Peltier here for the business update.
Well, we did say yesterday it could be a grim day, and it certainly was. It started here, really. We saw the market closing yesterday quite low, and then this has just carried on, and it's still carrying on. We're seeing a sea of red out there, and that's mostly because of Donald Trump's decision to ratchet up the trade war with an introduction of potential 10% increase, 10% tariffs on $300 billion worth of Chinese goods. That was late last week, and early this week, the Chinese government retaliated by letting the yuan slip to below 7 yuan per US dollar, which is the lowest level in more than a decade. And so that's what started this off. The U.S. government has said, well, this manipulation of the currency is not on, and they've reported it to the IMF. And so this is not good. This is an escalation of what is a trade war that seems to have no end, and certainly the market's not expecting one. In fact, we're expecting, the futures are showing that this sell-off is going to continue. The New Zealand market has certainly had a poor day. We finished down 1.7%, and that's better than we were earlier in the day. We had gone as far down as 2.5% down. One of our, the head of wealth research at Craig's Investment Partners, Mark Lister, sort of did a bit of an assessment for us, and we have a bit of what he had to say earlier this afternoon.
Great.
We're holding up better than what we saw in the US overnight, where most of the indices were down closer to 3 or 3.5%. So our market does tend to be a little bit more stable. We have less of the technology and growth stocks and more of the more stable property, infrastructure, utilities type stocks. So I think that's the reason we're probably holding up a little bit better. However, it's still a pretty ugly day out there. I think it'll get uglier when you see the likes of Australia and Japan open this afternoon. One would expect those markets to be sold off, and we'll all be watching how things develop over the rest of the week. At the moment, it feels like things probably get worse before they get better.
Right. Doesn't sound good at all.
No, so that's Mark Lister of Craig's Investment Partners. Now, amongst the markets that we're looking at, the Australian market was down about 2.5% just after 5 p.m. this afternoon. Right. In Asia, we're seeing the stocks being sold off. All the markets are looking pretty weak. But it's not just the share market. It's also commodities like oil has slumped. We have seen bond yields fall, and we're expecting this to carry on. Some of the safe haven assets like the Japanese yen and the Swiss currency are considered to be safe haven. Certainly gold is one of the commodities that we've seen increase in value substantially over the last couple of days, and also last week we're about advanced to a 6-year peak of $1,474 an ounce, so that's quite high. We're going to expect to see that kind of activity for a while, and it doesn't seem that this is going to end. As long as this trade war continues, we can expect to see that. So how our currency ended up, it had a bit of a topsy-turvy kind of day, and that was because of the labour market's numbers we heard a little bit earlier. So unemployment much better than the market was expecting. And then the Reserve Bank of Australia, they held their official cash rate steady at 1%. Tomorrow we're going to hear from our own Reserve Bank of New Zealand. We're expecting a rate cut there, and that wouldn't be a surprise in this environment. So
I think they kept it the same in Australia though today, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. They held it at 1%, and but there's still downside risk there. In fact, the ANZ, prior to the labour market numbers coming out, the ANZ Bank suggested that, just in line with what we heard from the Westpac Bank last week, was that there could potentially be 3 rate cuts from the RBNZ this year. It will take us down to 1.25% tomorrow potentially, and then 1% maybe in September, and 0.75% in November. So there you go. Anyways, we had our dollar ended up basically where it started out at 65.3 US cents, 96.4 Australian, and 53.7 British pence. There
Wonderful.
you are.
Thanks very much, Nana. Let's make it more positive tomorrow, eh?
I'll do my best.
Good on you. Nana Peltier there with the latest in the business world at 22.5 minutes to 6. Oranga Tamariki is investigating why it's taken a former state ward more than a decade to access his personal files. Doug Joyce was taken into state care, then the Children and Young Persons Service, when he was 3 years old. He described his childhood as troubled, and eventually he ran away from Dunedin to Christchurch at the age of 16. But ever since he became an adult, he's been trying to get his records from Oranga Tamariki, who holds them. He wants them so he can find long-lost relatives and piece together what happened to him during his time in state care. Some of his known family have had their records released, so why not his? Logan Church reports.
For Doug Joyce, now 33, the memory of being taken from his mother's arms is still fresh, although he still is not 100% sure why he was removed.
Don't remember much. I remember we lived on a farm somewhere down in near Invercargill, and
who's we?
Me, my father, my mother, and I think 2 other siblings lived there as well. Yeah, I remember latching onto my mum, and my arms being pulled and my legs still being latched onto my mum, and then it's just screaming the whole time.
And then began the years of being moved backwards and forwards between foster homes and state facilities in Dunedin. Doug says it was an unhappy and troubled childhood that included being sexually abused. He says the first person he ever spoke to about this was a doctor in Dunedin, who he says passed on that information to social workers. And Doug says the only way he knew how to deal with it as a kid was to behave badly.
I was uplifted and moved in the weekends and stuff like that because of being a troubled child, as they would say. Because I would think if the naughtier I would be, the more prone I would be to going home.
Eventually, Doug ran away.
What clicked in your mind to say, I need to go?
I felt great that day. When I finally got released from the state, I cried and I asked for help, and everyone said Christchurch is great. I was like coming to like on the Titanic movie when they see the Titanic for the first time, and it's like, oh my God, wow, like it was amazing.
Since then, Doug has worked hard to put his childhood behind him. He is a keen muso and has studied in Christchurch. But there is one thing holding him back. He has no idea about who he is, where he is from, who his iwi is, or even who many members of his family are. And Doug says he's tried and tried again to get his records.
When I was 17, I asked for my paperwork from Child, Youth and Family. It's always been a brush off the shoulder. To them, I don't know what it is. They just won't release it. I've been several times to ask for it.
This has gone on and on for years. Doug has even started recording his phone requests to them to prove it. And what makes this unusual is that some of his known relatives have asked for their records and got them very quickly. One example is Doug's nephew, whose records, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages long, is currently sitting on my desk. In it are school records, addresses, movement records, reports, all clues that could help Doug find his family.
Find out where I've come from and things like that, because that's what would help me. I would find out who my blood relatives are and the last names of the brothers and sisters and stuff who were refused to come and see us and things like that. So to me, it's helping me find family. I've spent 15 years looking.
Checkpoint asked Oranga Tamariki why this information was being withheld for so long. Under the Privacy Act, organisations are required to send such information in 20 working days, not 15 years. But after Checkpoint started asking questions, Doug received a call from an Oranga Tamariki manager yesterday afternoon. She apologised and told him a team is looking into why Doug hadn't been able to get his files. The manager told him that he should soon receive them. Doug hopes that after more than a decade, that will finally allow him to piece together his history. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Now, Steve Groom is Oranga Tamariki's General Manager for Ministerial and Executive Services. He declined to be interviewed, but he sent a statement in which he said he was concerned to hear about Doug's experiences. He says Oranga Tamariki's Privacy Act team received a request from Doug on June the 17th this year. Mr Groom says staff tried unsuccessfully to make contact with Doug until the 5th of August, when it obtained a new mobile phone number. So that's, 2 days ago? Yesterday. A new mobile phone number for him, and it's now working through his request. Mr Groom says after looking through former Child, Youth and Family files, Oranga Tamariki has been unable to find anything relating to a disclosure to a GP, but he wants to ensure Doug is receiving all the support he needs. Logan also went back to Doug, and Doug says he's not had any contact from Oranga Tamariki before Checkpoint got involved. It's coming up to, 17 minutes to 6. New Zealand protesters opposed to Hong Kong's contentious extradition bill say they've received death threats for speaking out, but it won't stop them having their say. Hundreds of people turned out at the Auckland University Quad for a rally today about the controversial law. Now, it comes just after a week after an altercation between opposing sides sparked a police investigation at the university. Jessie Chang reports.
Tensions were high at today's rally, with arguments breaking out among the crowd. One of the organisers, Serena Lee, says before the event people had tried to silence them. She says even though her group was given permission by Auckland University to post flyers about the extradition bill, others had covered those with their own messages.
Some words can be pretty offensive and try to cover the information that we posted up. So instead of having a fair discussion, two-sided, they're trying to cover what we're posting up.
The proposed bill, which would allow suspected criminals to be taken to China for a trial, has sparked weeks of protests in Hong Kong. The bill has been shelved by officials, but protesters say anger and frustration has spread in New Zealand and they want it completely withdrawn. A week ago, an altercation between pro-Beijing and anti-extradition law supporters ended, with one woman pushed to the ground on the Auckland University campus. A police investigation has been opened, and the university is making its own inquiries. Serena Lee, who was involved in the argument, says she's had to change her phone number and disable her social media accounts because of the abusive messages she's received.
I would say some will be like sexually abused, sexually wordings, whereas some will be because I'm also a New Zealand citizen, so they think that I don't have a right to speak.
Serena Lee has also received death threats against her and her family, and she's not the only one. Another man at the rally who has lived in New Zealand for around 30 years says he's shocked by the abuse he's received after speaking out.
Instagram, I get messages of people telling me to go die, my family should go die, like we're dogs, we're not humans, and like pretty much abuse all over.
And has that been from people just in New Zealand or also overseas?
Overseas, New Zealanders. We have had a couple from New Zealand, but we closed off all our social media accounts and our numbers.
50-year-old Stephen isn't from Hong Kong, but has lived most of his adult life there. He sees democratic rights in the region are slowly being taken away.
People who are not happy with the government are being treated as their enemies of China or enemies of Hong Kong, which is just incorrect. And I think that it's important that people realise that the freedoms that Hong Kong has traditionally enjoyed are being eroded.
Stephen now lives in New Zealand, partly because he felt democracy was deteriorating in Hong Kong. The Chinese consulate in Auckland released a statement last week saying some Western anti-China politicians and individuals had made irresponsible remarks about the situation in Hong Kong. It strongly condemned any activity that demonised China and Hong Kong officials. ACT Party leader David Seymour says that's unacceptable.
I've written a letter to the Chinese consulate saying that they're here with certain rights and duties, and one of their duties is not to interfere in our internal matters.
David Seymour says he's yet to receive a response from the consulate. Heightened university security as well as police officers kept a close eye on today's event. For the protesters, they say they won't be intimidated and are determined to continue standing up for the rights of Hong Kong people. I tamaki makoto mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko te si chang tēnei.
We're going to stay with Hong Kong. In fact, we're going to go there now as anti-government protests showed no sign of letting up. The territory's financial boss is warning the unrest could prompt a recession. More than 100 people were arrested overnight in the most widespread demonstrations yet, adding to the growing list of people charged since the anti-government campaign started back in June. Authorities are warning the region's business community is battling to weather the ongoing demonstrations. The ABC's Stephanie Smale has the very latest.
Hong Kong woke up to the carnage caused by another night of chaos. The worst of the violence came in the city's northern district, where hundreds of protesters set upon a police station, starting a bonfire outside the building and throwing bricks. Police were forced to hose down the blaze from the roof as the crowd surged angrily. Similar scenes of destruction continued in other parts of the region too, with simultaneous rallies in several parts of the city, including a traditionally conservative district. Even the tourism mecca Disneyland hasn't escaped the unrest, with about 50 staff staging a sit-in outside the amusement park. Ellen Cheng Lai Yi is the chairwoman of the Hong Kong Disneyland Cast Members Union.
Carrie Lam's mishandling
handling of the situation in Hong Kong has led to bloodshed, and she's still not taking responsibility. That's why the union is taking action to urge her to do her job.
Despite the unrest entering its 9th week, protesters haven't lost momentum. Bus, train and air services were paralysed in the financial city yesterday with a rare citywide strike. Hong Kong's financial secretary has warned the unprecedented anti-government protests could plunge the region's economy into recession. The South China Morning Post is reporting Hong Kong's finance boss Paul Chan has warned the economy is already hurting from the US-China trade war, and the internal challenges are hurting the bottom lines of shops, restaurants and retailers. Meanwhile, groups of pro-Beijing residents have held flag-raising ceremonies across the region to show their support for China. Parts of the business community joined in, with a number of China-invested companies based in Hong Kong accusing rioters of violating the bottom line of the so-called one country, two systems principle. Ip Shun Hing is from the Hong Kong Women Development Association.
This is a great insult to our country, and I hope the police can bring these thugs to justice as soon as possible. I'm very glad to see that some of us have already raised our national flag, which means we Hong Kong residents really love our country.
Pro-Beijing businessman Liu Shenhui also spoke against the protests.
The five-star red flag embodies the patriotism in the heart of every Chinese. Hong Kong is China's Hong Kong, and the five-star red flag flying high here is something absolutely normal.
Economists estimate Monday's demonstrations alone could have cost the region hundreds of millions of dollars.
Stephanie Smale there from Hong Kong at 10 minutes to 6. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. We're always keen for your feedback. Keep it coming in at 2101 on the text tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can get in touch on email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now, there's a little bit of traffic news here. Wellington's Mount Victoria tunnel is closed. This is after a crash. The police say the crash involved 2 vans and a motorcycle, and that was about half an hour ago. So initial information suggesting 1 person received minor injuries. The tunnel is still closed in both directions. So if you're driving around Mount Vic Tunnel in Wellington, please avoid it. The police are saying avoid it altogether if you can. At 9 minutes to 6, we're going to the US now. After a weekend of mass shootings which left 31 people dead, the President Donald Trump has announced he will visit the scene of the El Paso, Texas attack later this week. The attack there is being investigated as an act of domestic terrorism and hate crime. In a prepared speech to the nation, Mr. Trump condemned hatred and white supremacy, and he called for reform of mental health. His language was in sharp contrast to his rhetoric on Twitter and at public rallies. And in a rare intervention, the former President Barack Obama called on Americans to reject language from any of their leaders which feeds a climate of fear or normalises racism. The BBC's John Sopel sent this report.
We've been here before, we'll be here again. Another heart-wrenching vigil in an American city where deadly gun violence has made an unwelcome intrusion. In the midst of this darkness, there were also stories of immense heroism. Specialist soldier Glendon Oakley rescues many children, but he's haunted by the ones he couldn't save.
I understand it was heroic, and I'm looked at as a hero for it, but that wasn't the reason for me. I'm just focused on the kids that I could not get.
These deaths at the hands of the alleged killer, Patrick Crusius, brought a more reflective Donald Trump to the podium at the White House, and he was unequivocal. This was monstrous evil.
The shooter in El Paso posted a manifesto online consumed by racist hate. In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America.
He called for a new spirit of bipartisanship, but didn't offer any new gun control measures. The focus needed to be on the people who got hold of them.
We must reform our mental health laws to better identify mentally disturbed individuals who may commit acts of violence and make sure those people not only get treatment, but when necessary, involuntary confinement. Mental illness and hatred pulls the trigger, not the gun.
But Democrats say the president's own language when it comes to race and immigration at rallies like this one in the Florida Panhandle has helped create a toxic climate.
This is an invasion. When you see these caravans starting out with 20,000 people, that's an invasion. But how do you stop these people? You can't. There's no... That's only in the Panhandle you can get away with that statement.
But today from the president, the language is of a need for unity, the same words being spoken at the vigils.
There's too much hate everywhere. All the hateful rhetoric that's going around this nation has taken a toll on this city.
'Twas grace that he taught me fear.
We've heard calls before of the need for everyone to come together, but in the past in Washington, those words have tended to fall on deaf ears.
That report from the BBC's John Sopel coming up to 5 minutes to 6. A Dunedin surveyor who thinks the city's Baldwin Street was robbed of the world's steepest title plans to travel halfway across the world in an attempt to claim it back. Dunedin man Toby Stoff was the first to cry foul when Baldwin Street was stripped of its title, and now he's going to Harlech, Wales to put his theory to the test. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
It was the news heard around the world. Well, the surveying world. Dunedin's Baldwin Street, the steepest in the world for the past 3 decades, was ceding its title to Ffordd Penllwch in the Welsh town of Harlech. But to Toby Stoff, something seemed off. And he was proved right when Guinness World Records confirmed the Welsh record was measured at the inside verge of a curve, exaggerating the gradient. He's been up to Baldwin Street and taken some quick measurements, which have re-proven what's already known about Dunedin's contender.
I think the first survey was done back in the 1980s. I mean, we're able to do it a little bit more accurately now. I think I got something like 34.7% at the steepest off the top of my head. So within Kiwi of the 35%, not a million miles away.
He says with the assistance of Global Survey, a complete scan of Baldwin Street will be taken tomorrow, giving the most accurate picture of the street yet. Thanks to some behind-the-scenes string pulling, the same will happen with Ffordd Penllwch, and then the world and Guinness World Records can make up their mind.
I'm going to go over and survey it as well. Then I'll probably do a comparison. I can do like 2 profiles, just plot one on top of the other. And I'll just say, look, there's a centerline profile of both streets. I'm not going to say anything after that. I said, well, you guys be the judge. But I think once we've got all that information through, then it's in the public realm. Guinness can either say yay or nay.
Mr Stoff says he's pretty confident the final picture will demonstrate Baldwin Street as the rightful holder to the claim of world's steepest street. So you're pretty confident the centreline measurements are going to show Baldwin Street to be the far steepest street?
Well, on the centreline, yeah. I mean, they're better. If they don't, I'm going to look like a bit of a chump. But that's, as I understand it, the Welsh Street was measured on the steepest part was measured on the inside of the curve. By the time you get down onto the centreline, it should be a lot flatter. Hey, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's really steep on the centreline as well. But, until we actually take the measurements and compare them, there's no way of knowing, really.
And he's found some supporters in his former surveying school classmates who hatched the plan to send him to Wales and have so far raised about $5,000 to make it happen. Mike Constable, who's now based in Singapore, told Checkpoint they are preparing for the backlash which may come when they contest the record.
Toby has been in touch with the surveyor in Wales, so we expect him to be on the ground when Toby's there. But concerned about Toby getting a few leaks thrown at him and things like this, so we're going to outfit him with some protective equipment.
Mr Constable and another classmate, Dave Mitchell, started the online fundraising effort with former classmates and were now reaching out to others in the surveying world. Mr Mitchell says claiming the record back for Dunedin is about righting a wrong.
I haven't been there, Mike hasn't been there, Toby hasn't been there, but looking at it, at photographs and street view, etc., it's a bit of a lane, isn't it? It's hardly what I would call a proper street, and I think that a visit over there and a few measurements and stuff will expose it for what it is, a bit of a sham.
The pair are aiming to raise more than $10,000 and are hoping to send Mr Stoff to Harlech sometime in October when Gwyn Headley, the man behind the Ffordd Penllwch record, will be in town. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Timothy Brown, there was some very important technicalities about Baldwin Street and the Guinness World Record competition. And talking about streets, we've just got an update on the traffic situation in Wellington. There was a crash in the Mount Vic Tunnel. It's just been reopened. So police getting in touch just now saying they're warning of significant delays, but there was a crash, 2 vans and a motorcycle and someone injured there. And just nearby on Adelaide Street, there was another crash at 5:30 and someone there with some serious injuries. It's a car and a motorcycle. So do take care if you're in that area around the Basin Reserve, around the Mount Vic Tunnel, although the tunnel is open in both directions. Just before we get to the news, we've got some feedback. It's really coming in on Ihumātao. Thanks for getting in touch. And just a longer one here from Errol, because we did put out a call for people who were there last night to get in touch. Errol was there. He says, after seeing social media posts, I went along. This is regarding the escalation of police numbers and the anticipation that they were going to take action against the protesters. The police line was right through the middle of the occupied area of Ihumātao Quarry Road. This is what Errol says. He says the police brought in extra staff for 2 reasons. One, to stop the flow of blankets and food to the frontliners, to wear them down and cause stress and anxiety. And 2, a show of force. We put that to the police earlier in the program, and they deny that. But Errol goes on to say the police were trying to intimidate the protectors by dividing the occupation. They didn't expect 500 people to turn up over the next few hours, which meant the police, of their own accord, backed away as they were outnumbered 5-1. Whenever the police pat themselves on the back and tell us how professional they are, they're not telling the truth. Well, that's Errol's point of view. Get in touch if you've got that point of view or another one. We'll get to it after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei ātaua tēnei. The Deputy Police Commissioner Wally Haumaha has arrived at Ihumātao to meet with protesters. A pōwhiri is taking place inside a large marquee on Ihumātao Quarry Road. About 80 people have come to greet Mr Haumaha to discuss a resolution to the standoff. A hui will take place after the pōwhiri, but this is closed to media. The police say they were forced to scramble extra officers at Ihumātao last night because protesters indicated their intention to trespass. Dozens of police officers were at the disputed land in South Auckland overnight, blocking Ihumātao Quarry Road with crowds of protesters standing in front of them. The county's Manukau District Commander, Superintendent Jill Rogers, says police lines were forced back at one stage and officers retreated. She says a significant number of extra officers were deployed and calm was restored with the help of protest organisers.
The information that we'd received from the protest group that their intention was to return to the Kaitiaki village, which is part of the disputed land, therefore in breach of the court orders that exist. We can't allow people to undertake unlawful activity. Our role there is to ensure that peace is maintained.
Superintendent Jill Rogers. New Zealand First has blindsided the Labour Party by raising the prospect of there being a binding referendum on proposed abortion changes. The legislation was unveiled yesterday after months of negotiations to get it into a shape agreeable to both parties. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, is refusing to say how his MPs will vote on the bill at its first reading this week. Instead, he's suggesting the party may push for a public vote on the matter, as it has done on euthanasia. That's despite his senior MP, Tracy Martin, telling RNZ yesterday that the party had no plans to call for a referendum on abortion. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, was caught off guard by the news and told reporters the matter didn't need to go to the public. The debate is a conscience matter, which means MPs won't be bound by party lines when they vote on Thursday. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
The hunt is now on to find a new chair to head the Royal Commission into Historic Abuse in Care. Sir Anand Satyanand has announced his resignation and will leave in November, citing a wish to spend more time with his family. He says now the set-up phase of the inquiry is complete, he'll hand over the responsibility for finishing it to someone else. The Minister, Tracy Martin, says establishing an inquiry of this scope and complexity is a testament to Sir Anand's leadership. She says a new chair has to be found by November.
This is a moment in time where I now need to go and consult with the Commission members, with my colleagues, and find another chair that will now pick up the mantle from Sir Anand and move forward.
Tracy Martin, the Internal Affairs Minister. The New Zealand share market has had its biggest one-day fall in 10 months as it got caught up in the turmoil caused by the escalating US-China trade war. The benchmark top 50 index officially closed 179 points, nearly 1.7% lower. It is the worst daily session since mid-October last year. At one stage, it was down more than 2% as investors dumped risky stocks and sought safety on the sidelines. But all but 4 stocks in the main index fell in price, with the biggest drops for some of those doing business with China or which had risen strongly in the recent market rally. The New Zealand market was in record territory last week and even after today's slide is up more than 21% in value. Markets around Asia are also weaker but have also bounced off their lows, although Europe and US markets are expected to remain volatile when they resume business tonight. A Dunedin surveyor is headed to Wales to take issue with the way a Welsh competitor for the world's steepest street was measured. Mr Stoff is questioning the way Harlech's fourth bank was measured at the inside verge of the curve, rather than the more usual practice of using the centre line. He says this would have greatly exaggerated the Welsh street's steepness. His former classmates from surveying school Mike Constable and Dave Mitchell have started a crowdfunding campaign to get him to Harlech. Mr Stoff says once both streets have been measured accurately from the centre line, he will put all the evidence before Guinness World Records and let them decide if Dunedin's Baldwin Street should have its record reinstated.
At the moment, we've just got a number, 35% for Baldwin, 37.45 for Ford Pen Lake, but there's no visual sort of stuff. You can't actually visualise it unless you walk up both streets.
Toby Stoff says his analysis will show both streets' steepness in a line graph, making it easier to compare and interpret. It's 6:05. The All Blacks will pay extra attention to Wallabies playmaker Kurtley Beale on Saturday night in Perth, with Beale said to have as much X factor as Israel Folau. Folau's exit from the Wallabies has left Australia with a big hole to fill at fullback, but Beale is expected to again step in for the opening Bledisloe Cup test. All Blacks coach Steve Hansen is set to name a full-strength side as he demands a dramatic improvement after the side's opening 2 rugby championship matches.
We've had a couple of weeks together now and 2 games, so everybody's played a game just about. So, we're expecting to see things improve and combinations starting to click.
Steve Hansen. The New Zealand Breakers have acquired 3 more offshore players unfamiliar with the Australian National Basketball League as part of their roster overhaul. 7 newcomers will take to the court this season, led by US point guard RJ Hampton, who's touted to be a future NBA star. He'll be joined by another American guard, Sek Henry, who was the Israeli League MVP 2 years ago. Nigerian Chris Obekpa made it to the fringe of the NBA but now plays in Turkey. The third new signing is Lebanon international Atta Majok, who last played in the NBL with the now-defunct Gold Coast Blaze in 2011. The former Black Caps captain Brendan McCullum has announced his retirement from all cricket at the end of the Global T20 tournament in Canada. McCullum, who retired from international cricket 3 years ago, now wants to go into coaching. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Kirsten Johnstone has another song crush on Christine and the Queens. Trevor Ricci chats with Ladysmith Black Mambazo leader Albert Mazabuko. There's a window on the world of the CIA. And this week's After Dinner speaker, Eric Brenstrom, has another global weather report for us. Hot, hot, hot in the north, especially the Arctic north, but an outbreak of cold over New Zealand. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel and Taumaranui. Occasional showers, some heavy and possibly thundery about Taranaki and Waitomo later tomorrow. For Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine spells and the odd shower spreading from the west. Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, partly cloudy with a few showers. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine apart from high cloud. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast through to Wellington, also Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds. Mostly fine, a few showers tomorrow. For the remainder of Marlborough, including Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine with high cloud at times, isolated showers about coastal Southland and Clutha. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, scattered showers, rain for Fiordland tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, showers easing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's now coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. We will be going back soon to Ihumātao to get the very latest after that scuffle and altercation last night. We'll have our head of Te Mana Korohi team, Mani Dunlop, reporting from Ihumātao. But first, in a shock move, the head of the biggest royal commission in New Zealand history is stepping down after 18 months in the role. Sir Anand Satyanand has chaired the inquiry into historical abuse in care since its establishment, but says he's leaving the job in November because the workload has increased markedly. He'll now take up a 4-year role as Chancellor of Te Whare Wānanga o Waikato, or Waikato University. Our reporter Katie Scotcher and her cameraman Nick Monroe sat down with Sir Anand in Hamilton this morning before his departure was made public.
Well, you have been the chair of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in Care since it was established last February, and now you're leaving. Can you explain your departure?
Yes, it is a change, but there's a context to it. The set-up phase has been intensive. It's taken a long time, and the implementation phase that is about to begin is going to take much longer than anyone predicted. So I've taken the opportunity at the age of 75, knowing that the survivors are being cared for, knowing that I have good colleagues, knowing that there is a good system in place. This is a sensible opportunity for the chairship of the Royal Commission to change. And the Minister's accepted that. I've had a number of discussions with her, and it seems sensible that I've taken responsibility for the build-up, for the intensity involved with survivor advisory groups and all the things, the electronic things that have been needed to ensure security for survivors. That is now all in place. We've got our procedural hearing in a couple of weeks' time, our contextual hearing at the end of October, and at that time the government will have had an opportunity to appoint a new chairperson, and I'll step down.
So effectively the workload that comes with being the chair of this commission, which you've previously described as being New Zealand's biggest royal commission, just got too much for you?
Well, it's substantial. Too much is a judgment for someone else, but I think that it is a substantial workload. I'd actually thought in a ballpark way as we started and had reason to understand this is a 3 day a week, 3 week a month and done within 3 years kind of role. I don't think there's been any week since the beginning of last year where I've had 3 days. It's usually been 4 and most often 5, and it has been a significant piece of effort.
When did you decide that you were going to step down as chair?
Earlier in this year, I had the spectre of the onset of my 75th birthday, the fact that things were taking some considerable time. I had discussions with a few colleagues. I had discussions with the Minister, with whom I've had good relations throughout, and the idea was accepted, and it simply became then a matter of timing.
Was it your decision to leave the inquiry?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And I made my position clear, and the position was accepted by the Minister and the government officials and my commissioner colleagues, who were, obviously surprised and concerned, but they have accepted it.
Was there any pressure from inside your team to leave the inquiry?
No, there wasn't. It was my initiative and my decision.
Any pressure from your fellow commissioners that you've been working with?
Not at all. No.
Any pressure from the Department of Internal Affairs?
No. There is a proper distance between the Department of Internal Affairs and the Royal Commission. We have agreed upon and maintained and independence from the Department of Internal Affairs. There is a linkage, of course, to do with provision of finance, etc., and budgeting and so forth, but operationally the Royal Commission is separate and independent.
So your decision to leave was entirely your own?
Yes. Age, time and commitment. 75. This is taking a lot longer than anyone imagined. How can I effect change causing the least disturbance?
Do you think the Royal Commission of Inquiry is functioning well and has been since February last year?
Yes, it is. It's had a number of complexities as it's developed its capacity to do the work. For example, the creation of a separate computer system with appropriate security to ensure that information relating to survivors will be kept aside from any other organisation, including the government, etc. That's taken a long time to put into place. It's taken a long time to recruit the best people to do the job. We now have a legal team that would be the envy of any Royal Commission, a really high-level legal team. We have community advisors. There's a whole division led by a woman called Belinda Chin with extensions into the disabled, Māori, Pacific, LGBTI communities, which is where many of the survivors are located. We have ambassadors who are helping to bring those people in the hard-to-reach community towards the Royal Commission to tell their accounts and to make sure that they are catered for in that regard. Well-being is another topic that we've had to work really hard on to make sure that people have a satisfying experience, because to talk about things that have been suppressed for many years involving physical and psychological abuse and neglect are often hard to bring up, hard to talk about, and when they've happened, people's well-being needs to be looked after. And we've spent time developing appropriate numbers of well-being people. Now, all these things to which I have made reference have taken their time to put in place. But I can say responsibly that the Royal Commission is functioning and that the position of survivors remains at the forefront of our operation.
There have been some survivors, though, who haven't been satisfied with the process so far.
Yes, and that is so in any organisation that is doing something new. Survivors are people who were ignored for so many years, and finally the government reacted to the submissions that had been made, and survivors are not people who can be put into a one-size-fits-all basket. And of course there have been people, and it has been in the news, that people have had unfortunate experiences, but I can tell you that we have taken on board what has happened, have worked out why it has happened, and if there has been a mistake or something wrong occur, there have been steps put in place to fix that.
That's Sir Anand Satyanand, who's stepping down from chairing the Historical Abuse Inquiry, speaking to our reporter Katie Scotcher in Hamilton earlier today before that news went public. It's just gone 17 minutes past 6. Hundreds gathered around New Zealand today as part of a national day of action for Ihumātao. It comes after a tense standoff between police and protesters at the contested site in South Auckland last night, with protest leader Pania Newton alleging that she was pushed by a police officer, something that the police today rebutted earlier in the program. The police say they they boosted their numbers after the protest group indicated their intention to unlawfully occupy land at the Kaitiaki village in breach of a court order. Marnie Dunlop reports.
Motiatia tonga puoro and speeches filled the front lawn at Parliament today as more than 300 people gathered in solidarity with those at Ihumātao. Te Puawai o Te Atua came down from Ihumātao this morning to be in Wellington. She live-streamed events at Ihumātao throughout the night and says the police presence has left an uneasy feeling at the occupation. But she is overwhelmed by today's rally in the capital and the support shown.
It means everything and more to me to be here, to be able to give this back to mana whenua who are doing everything possible within their with what they have, with all their resources, to be able to return home with a kete of love, a kete of unity, and the biggest taonga of all is just their presence, their tautoko. So I'm sure once I return back to Ihumātao with a pleasant surprise, mana whenua will be overjoyed to see the tautoko coming around the nation.
Organisers of the event asked people to fill kete with koha or offerings that Te Puawai o Te Atua will take back to Ihumātao with her tomorrow. Another protester, high school student Amy of Te Whanua Apanui, says she has followed the events closely.
Oh my gosh, I have been on Instagram 24/7 because I just want to, I feel like that's the only way I can be there because I can't actually be up at Ihumātao, and I'm just trying to do everything I can, share stories, just spread it with people who aren't even Māori so they know the issue that's happening in New Zealand for not just Māori but for New Zealanders in general.
Dan of Ngāti Whakauē and Te Arawa is making his way to Ihumātao this weekend. He says he believes the whenua should be returned to mana whenua and supports those he says are protecting the land.
I'm just here to tautoko the Kaitiaki up north. I want to let them know that they have got supporters around the country. I'm kind of here to, protest against the suppression tactics that the cops have been using up there, and just to say that it's not okay. And just to stand up and be seen.
Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson was at the rally today with other Green MPs. She has openly supported the occupation and applauds them for how they handled the situation last night.
They are wanting to focus on protecting the whenua and are not wanting to make this about police. I'll take my leadership from them, and I commend them for keeping the calm in light of increased police presence.
In other parts of the country, other rallies as part of the Ihumātao National Day of Action took place. Firstly this morning at Fletcher's headquarters in Auckland. One protester who was there says it's about looking after the whenua, not making profit.
We want to protect Ihumātao for future generations to come. Yeah, there are 500 or so houses. They might line their pockets, but got to think about the big picture forever and ever for all the generations and protect this sacred land.
About 150 people in Whanganui gathered to show their support at Pākaitori today, the same site Māori occupied for 79 days in the early 90s. Iwi leader Ken Mea says his people also fought for their land that was stolen and can relate to what's happening at Ihumātao.
Today was about, for us here at Whanganui, Pākaitori, to show our support to our people up there, the tangata whenua, the mana whenua, and in particular the very, very simple message to us is that they want their lands returned, and it was confiscated. And that's it, simple.
A small group in Dunedin also took part in an event where they painted a mural and learnt the history of Ihumātao. For Checkpoint, ko Marnie Dunlop tēnei.
It's 21.5 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Labour Party is staying tight-lipped about an investigation into allegations of bullying and sexual assault by a Labour staffer. The investigation is being reviewed following complaints it was mishandled and was traumatising for the alleged victims. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern labelled it a party matter and something for Party President Nigel Howarth to answer questions on. But Mr Howarth bowled past media, ignoring questions this morning. Our political reporter Yvette McCullough has the story.
It's understood several complaints were laid against a Labour staffer for inappropriate behaviour, including bullying and sexual harassment and assault. An investigation into the allegations was carried out, and it concluded no further action should be taken. The matter was also not referred to the police. But some of the alleged victims have raised concerns about how the investigation was handled. Jacinda Ardern says it's now being looked at independently.
The party and of course myself want to be assured that we are looking after the people who join the Labour Party. And look, by and large, we have many members who do have a good experience in the party, but when people tell us they don't, we need to take that seriously.
Ms Ardern wouldn't confirm any further details about the allegations, including how many people laid complaints or where the person involved worked.
I don't want to get into some of the details, particularly when it wasn't an employment matter. This is being raised as an issue with the party from the perspective of a party member, not an employment matter. So I do need to be clear on those distinctions.
Jacinda Ardern said as this is a matter for the party, some questions would be better put to the party president, Nigel Harworth. But Mr Harworth refused to stop and respond to reporters' questions on his way into the Labour caucus meeting this morning.
I am late for caucus. Excuse me. Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going through to caucus and I've issued a statement yesterday already, which is absolutely appropriate.
Have you got a culture problem?
Following the Young Labour summer camp allegations of sexual assault last year, an inquiry by lawyer Maria Austin recommended major changes to the party's bullying, sexual harassment and assault policies. Jacinda Ardern says the party has completely changed its processes since then.
This has been a test of whether or not we've now learnt from that, and the party's taking a good look as to whether or not we've satisfied the natural process of justice and whether or not we've supported the complainants as we should have. We're waiting to find out what an independent view of that looks like, but we do take these matters really seriously.
Wellington Central MP Grant Robertson is also understood to have been aware of these allegations. He too was deflecting questions today.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's in anyone's interest in this scenario, least of all the people who've made complaints, for me to be commenting on that at this time. So, we'll let the party's processes play out.
Mr Robertson says he always wants everyone to feel safe in Labour and the party needs to do everything it can to make that happen. And the party, it seems, is waiting for the outcome of this review to assess whether it is doing enough. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
It's coming up to 25 minutes past 6, 1 week into a nationwide strike by psychologists working for the public health system. At least one mental health service for children and adolescents has been put on hold. About 600 clinical psychologists are refusing to work overtime for 6 weeks. They're negotiating with the country's 17 district health boards for increased pay. Amy Williams has more.
As the country's public health clinical psychologists pull back on overtime, at least one district health board has cancelled a service for the duration of the industrial action. Auckland District Health Board says one of its after-hours talking therapy groups for children and adolescents cannot run. APX represents the striking clinical psychologists, and its National Secretary, Deborah Powell, says members are asking for better pay rates to retain and attract people in their profession. She says waiting times to see clinical psychologists have stretched to 9 months in some cases, when it should be less than 1 month.
They are deeply worried about their waiting list and that people are not getting seen in a timely fashion and not getting the help that they need, these talking therapies that are so important for so many of our people. That's why they've been doing overtime. Unfortunately, as that has continued, we still haven't addressed the fundamental recruitment and retention problem, and it's just got to the point where the psychologists are putting their feet down and saying it's not good enough.
Dr Powell says the country needs about 300 more clinical psychologists. Earlier this year, the government said it had allocated nearly $2 billion for mental health care. Dr Powell says the money's there to fix the problem, it just needs to be deployed.
What we need now is for that money to be spent so we can actually recruit and retain psychologists, so we can get on with treating people, so this 9 months waiting to see a psychologist can be cut down so that the psychologists can stop treating patients, outside ordinary hours, because there simply aren't enough of them to do the work during ordinary hours.
Mental Health Foundation Chief Executive Sean Robinson says they're continually approached by people who struggle to access support. Mr Robinson says the system caters for a minority of people in severe need, but 1 in 5 Kiwis experience mental distress each year.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to realise that those DHB services have had a huge number of people, trying to get through the door, and the staff, are extremely overworked and overloaded. And sadly, many people have not been able to get through the door, and far too many people are missing out on support.
Mr Robinson says the cancellation of Auckland DHB's Child and Adolescent Talking Therapy Group for the duration of the strike is a symptom of stretched resources. Victoria University clinical psychologist Dougal Sutherland sits on the Psychology Workforce Task Force group, set up last year to advise government on how to address the skills shortage. Dr Sutherland says it takes 8 years to train as a clinical psychologist, and each year 90 graduate from New Zealand universities. He said there's been a noticeable increase in dissatisfied clinical psychologists leaving the public health sector.
It's the hardest of the hard work, and it's often, there's not a lot of variety often, so you're often dealing with people from really complex backgrounds with really complex difficulties that they're seeking help with. But if that's all you're doing, especially if you are, relatively new in your career, that can be a good recipe for burnout.
Dr Sutherland says the profession is waiting to see how the government money will be allocated to attract people to the mental health services workforce. In the meantime, clinical psychologists are continuing negotiations with district health boards. For Checkpoint, this is Amy Williams.
We've got a little bit of feedback for you before we go. People are getting in touch still on Ihumātao. Michael's got in touch with his judgment on our coverage. He says, your coverage of the trespassing protesters is extraordinarily one-sided. Michael goes on to say, the protesters are playing the media like a fiddle. I can't believe the patience of the police. There are a number of Māori positions on this issue, but only one is getting oxygen. I think Shane Jones summed up the situation succinctly. A bunch of freedom campers. That's Michael's point of view. We did have a longish interview last hour with Jill Rogers from the police. You can listen to that. And maybe the feedback from another listener could counter that. This person says about Ihumātao and our interview with the police as well as protesters, people hear what they want to hear, that which confirms their existing opinions. There you go. And because it is Cook Islands Language Week, we will leave you with a e no ora.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Protesters at Ihumātao are holding a pōwhiri with the Deputy Police Commissioner Wari Haumaha to try to resolve their land dispute. New Zealand First surprises Labour by raising the prospect of a binding referendum on proposed reform of the abortion law. Praise for Sir Anand Sachinand as he prepares to step away from chairing the Royal Commission into Historic Abuse and Care. And the New Zealand share market had its biggest one-day fall in 10 months on the back of the escalating US-China trade war. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
There's absolutely no room in the 21st century for racism of the kind that characterised the 19th and the 20th.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
The key thing, of course, everybody wonders about is whether or not the PLA, China's military, would get on the streets here.
Live with local, national and international